So in this video, we are going to be taking a look at some oddities in Lizzy that confuse people from time to time, and I'm going to show you how to properly investigate some of this stuff if you actually know how to look at the journal ledger and you're confused about something that you're seeing. So we are actually looking at a dealer's data, and I'm going to try to keep it as obscure as possible, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail as to what is happening here. But what I do want to do is I want to kind of focus on the general ledger. And so I'm on an invoice, and we're going to go ahead and click on View Journal Ledger Hits down here at the bottom. And what started this conversation, and I'm also going to show you a few little tricks to investigate some of this stuff along the way. But what started this hunt was the dealer caught the fact that the general ledger on this invoice didn't really match up to what he was seeing on the unit, and he was a little bit confused. And what it ended up being is, the one thing is that they had an internal ticket that was not linked to this deal, therefore it wasn't cashed out with the deal, but it was linked to the unit, and it just got them confused. But the big thing I wanted to point out here is that when you're looking at the general ledger, the first thing to note is that up here at the top there's a checkbox here. It says View GL Details, and when you turn that on, it actually gives you some pretty handy information. One of the things is the transaction number that's down here. Every single set of entries that happens in the general ledger for Lizzy, first of all, has to balance. It is physically impossible for anything to hit the journal ledger unbalanced. So for those that are concerned that that happens, it doesn't. It really is. It's physically impossible for it to happen. But sometimes things will get linked. For example, we're looking at an invoice, so every journal ledger hit that's on this invoice has this invoice ID on it. So it knows that that GL goes with this particular invoice. But if something were to happen that doesn't have an invoice ID tied to it, like for example maybe sublet labor, which has created a purchase order, it's not linked directly to this PO, so you're not going to see that when you're viewing the GL entries for the invoice. And in comparison, if we have things on the unit that happened outside of the unit that didn't physically get tagged with that unit ID but are in fact related to this overall deal, they'll get lost as well. Now, the second thing that you need to keep in mind is that every single set of GL entries that happen, after they balance, they all get a common transaction ID, which if you look at this, you can see that when we cashed out this invoice, or when we did this particular thing here, they have a transaction ID of 26507. They're both linked to this invoice, but they both have that transaction ID. But if we scroll down just a little bit, you'll see where the invoice itself got cashed out, and all of those transaction IDs, they all match. So this first set of hits were where we brought in a consignment unit and actually brought it into inventory in order to turn around and sell it. So it wasn't related to the actual invoice that got cashed out, but it is related, but it didn't happen at the exact same time. So it has its own transaction ID. Now, where does this come into play, and how do I use it? So the first thing that I want to point out that a lot of people are just completely not aware of is that I am currently looking at an invoice. If I were to go up here to the top right hand corner, there's a plus sign, and if I click this plus sign, it will actually open up Lizzy in another tab. So you can see up here now I have two separate tabs, and in this second tab I'm going to go over here to accounting, and we're going to go to the general ledger, and we're going to hit locate. Now I'm going to come over here to the right, and we're going to tell it that we want to locate by a transaction ID. And then we're going to flip back to our first tab, and we're going to come down here, and we're just going to grab this first transaction ID. So I'm going to copy that, and we're going to come back over here, and we're going to paste it in. Now I'm going to go ahead and mention that after doing this yesterday, I am going to have one of the developers, add the ability to actually do this search from that View GL control. So in the future, you won't have to copy and paste, but right now this is the way this works. So at this point, we can see that there really were only two GL entries that got done during that particular point in time. So now I want to do something else. We're going to go back over here to invoicing. We're going to view this invoice. I'm sorry, I don't need to do it from that tab. We're going to go back over here to the invoice, and we're going to come up here and we're going to go look at this unit. So I'm going to leave the invoice for a minute. We're going to go take a look at the unit, and I'm going to click on inventory GL hits. Now, this is another good example. If I look at this, this does not balance. This doesn't look right. When I add these two numbers and these two numbers together, I'm not coming up with the same number. If I look over here at and again, these entries are looking for inventory hits, and they're looking for things that are linked to the unit. So the possibility is that there's something else that happened that is not specifically linked to either inventory, or it wasn't linked to that particular unit, but it was included in this process. So if we look here, we have a transaction ID of 26507, 26552, and 26553. Well, the first thing that I notice is 26507 is only on here once, which clearly tells me that this particular entry was actually, there's something that is just not showing up here that was part of this transaction. So this is where we hit the inventory. Let's go look and see what the other side of that hit was. So we're going to come back over here, and I inadvertently clicked the wrong thing over here. So we're going to come back over here and we're going to search for this new transaction ID. And now you can see that we actually had a customer deposit, which is obviously not an inventory hit, that offset that inventory miscellaneous hit. And because it's not an inventory hit, it doesn't show up when you're on the unit and you're viewing the GL hits for the unit's inventory. It's obviously not an inventory account. So while we're trying to narrow this stuff down, sometimes things are left out because they don't directly affect that particular thing. Well, let's look at all GL hits for the unit. You would assume that everything that is in here is actually in the unit, everything. But again, if it wasn't tagged with the specific unit, then it's not going to show up over here. So if you look here, you've got 26507, which is where we actually brought the consignment unit in, and that was also the hit that was on the invoice. And then if you look, we got 26552, which is almost all of the other hits, which is where the invoice actually got cashed out. And then we've got 26553. Well, the first thing is, let's take a look at 26553. And the first thing that you'll notice here is that there's actually a lot more hits related to that transaction ID than what is actually showing up over here. There's only 4 hits here for 26553. But if we look on the GL, there's actually 8 hits. And so some of the things that took place were not directly related to the invoice or the unit that it actually happened on, or actually could have been on the invoice, but it's not directly linked to that particular unit. There were things like doc fees and other things that got done on that deal that are part of the transaction. They're just not part of the unit itself. And so only looking at the GL here for the unit, you miss out on some of the other stuff that took place. So these view GL inventory and all GL and view GL on the invoice, they are attempting to give you a good view of what happened at that particular point in time. But you have to keep in mind that if things don't balance, when you're looking at the GL in Lizzy and it doesn't balance, you need to dig a little bit deeper and make sure that you're looking at the whole view and not just some subset of data that we've narrowed down to try to give you a closer view of what was related to the particular unit, because in a lot of cases there are other things that are outside of that unit or outside of that deal that were in effect causing things to look like they didn't balance when they really do.